Former Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak wheeled into court on a gurney today wearing a white defendant's jumpsuit. His murder trial has adjourned until Monday, picking up after a 3-month delay. He's accused of ordering the killing of hundreds of protesters to clamp down on the revolt that eventually ended his 30 years in power. He is pleading not guilty, and you see him there sort of obscured by several men in dark suits. Mubarak stepped down in February. That makes 10 months since the military took over in Egypt. So much is different, but so much is the same. Protesters are still in Tahrir Square, but this time they're standing against military rule when initially they had stood with it. The protests have turned dangerous at times. Take this video from earlier this month showing soldiers attacking a woman, stomping on her and dragging her away. You see it there on the left-hand side of your screen. And just this week, a prominent blogger was let out of jail and headed straight to Tahrir Square to join demonstrators. He says the general in charge of military police should be put on trial for killing protesters, the same crime Mubarak is accused of. Stephen Cook is a senior fellow for Middle Eastern Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations, and he's the author of a book, The Struggle for Egypt from Nasser to Tahrir Square. Stephen Cook, thanks for joining us. When you see these images of protesters in Tahrir Square, of soldiers stomping on a woman's bare chest, of Alaa Abdel Fattah, a prominent blogger, jailed for several weeks before being released, has anything changed in Egypt?
Well, it certainly seems from those images and from everything that has been going on over the course of the last couple of months, but certainly in the last few weeks, that as much as things have changed in Egypt, they certainly have not. Young activists are continuing to stay in Tahrir Square and the streets as a permanent revolution against military rule, which they suspect for trying to salvage as much as they can of the Mubarak regime. And I think that there's a lot of evidence that that is, in fact, what the military strategy has been.
Okay, and when U.S. viewers watch these images and they think, wait a minute, in February we had this revolution and Mubarak stepped down and democracy was supposed to flourish in that country. And we did have a few rounds of legislative elections in Egypt where the Muslim Brotherhood scored very well. So what is the future then for that country after having gone through such a difficult and historic year?
Well, for anyone who is paying attention to what's going on in Egypt, the idea that Egypt would relatively smoothly transition from 60 years of autocracy to a democracy was not necessarily dealing with the facts of the situation. I think that Egypt is in for a long-term struggle as Egyptians debate what kind of society that they want. And you could see that the military has a very different vision of the future of Egypt as the activists in Tahrir Square, which is very different from what the Muslim Brotherhood, which has, as you just mentioned, done quite well in the most recent round of elections. So this is going to be a long-term process in which Egyptians work out their future, and it's going to be marked by periodic spasms of violence, continuing protest, uncertainty, and instability.
Well, when you look at the parties that do well when there are free elections, for instance, in Tunisia, the country that sparked this whole Arab Spring movement, you have these relatively moderate Islamic parties that score well. Is that what a democratic Arab world will look like when elections are held?
Well, we're not sure. In the early going, it seems that these Islamist groups, which are well-organized and well-resourced and have been so for quite some time, certainly have an upper hand over new political parties that have emerged as a result of these uprisings. What will really be the telltale sign of Egypt's move towards a more democratic political system is how Egyptians go about writing the Constitution and the content of that Constitution. Now, this is not going to be an easy process by any stretch of the imagination, but the real focus now is going to be on the content of this Constitution, and that will, the development of Egyptian institutions after the fall of Mubarak will tell us what kind of society Egypt will be.
Not just Egypt, though, Stephen, as you know, what happens in the most populous Arab country has an influence on the rest of the Arab world. So it's going to be so important what happens in 2012. We always appreciate your analysis. Stephen Cook, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Hal.